Mr. Crenshaw, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. We'll state some key facts, I think, that are important to start this discussion. Key fact number one, energy demand will go up 50% or so in the next few decades by 2050. Energy demand will go up. Another key fact, the primary reason that emissions in the US have gone down is because of fracking. It's because of our natural gas revolution, which emits maybe half the CO2 of coal. And it wasn't a bunch of environmental activists that pursued that goal. It was our oil and gas industry that pursued that goal. It was not environmental regulations that made that fact happen, but it is a fact nevertheless. And so we find ourselves with the ultimate question, as we always do, which is costs and benefits. That's the question we have to answer. What is the cost to this action, and what are the actual benefits of it? If we all agree on the scientific consensus, which we'll say is the IPCC report, that there is warming going on, it's related to carbon emissions, and there's some interest in mitigating that. But I gotta say, the alarmist view of this question has been wholly debunked. It has been wholly and completely debunked. And I'm not saying that any of our witnesses are even implying that it's true, but it's worth stating that as a fact. And so when we look at cost benefits, we have to look at what's the value? Is there an inherent value in renewables? Does it just make us feel good? Is it almost like a religious obsession? Or is there an actual value? And that value might be measured by costs and benefits. How much does it cost to implement this technology? And what are the benefits we derive from it? And this is where I think we run into problems and disagreements certainly with our colleagues here. So I want to start with Mr. Hausker. Here's a basic question that I think people have a right to ask. What's the point of the U.S. diminishing our emissions by some of the goals set out by this administration, which are enormously costly? What's the point of it if the facts are, if we stopped emitting tomorrow, by the year 2100, it would have potentially a change in global temperature by 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit. So, a very insignificant benefit to an enormous cost. Now, that's a crazy cost. That's if we stopped emitting tomorrow. But what's the point of doing that when countries like China are building more coal capacity every single day and have no intention of stopping?
As I said earlier, no one country has created the climate change problem, and no one country can solve it. If I could wave a magic wand and eliminate China's emissions entirely, we would still have a problem. Eliminate US emissions, as you hypothesized, we would still have a problem, or India's, or any country. So this is a challenging problem of collective action across nations with only a few precedents, like how we phased out ozone-depleting chemicals.
And so it begs the question, like, what would that magic wand be? Since we don't have magic wands, but we do have policy levers. And so what would that be? Mm-hmm. And I can't help but go back to the obvious, which is, well, you would hopefully replace their coal furnaces with natural gas furnaces. That's what you would hopefully do, and you'd halve the emissions. Now, how would you do that? That's a separate question, perhaps, for diplomats and U.S. trade representatives and deals made at the highest levels. But if we're thinking just logically about how to actually reduce emissions, since that's supposedly our entire goal, why aren't we all in agreement on that, on exporting more natural gas to dirty coal-burning countries?
Why are we not in agreement?
Yeah, are we not in agreement? Maybe we are.
I think, as Ms. Eversole said, the export of LNG by the United States has had all sorts of positive impacts for Europe adjusting gas supplies in the wake of the Ukrainian invasion, and to the extent that our gas exports can replace coal, that's going to have a positive effect on global emissions.
Yeah, well, it certainly would, and I think we can export a lot more. Last question here. We have to talk about costs of renewables, and I don't think the costs of renewables have ever been, until recently, I think, accurately defined. But truthfully, what we're talking about is, a needed land, 10 times more land needed for solar and wind power for the same unit of energy than, say, gas and coal and nuclear. basically unrecyclable materials. 90% of solar panels aren't recycled. It would take a ton of heat to recycle them, which of course would produce more carbon emissions, because I don't think you can get that heat from solar and wind power. And so you've got this real problem. How do you take that into account when assessing the costs and benefits of pushing heavily and subsidizing heavily renewables?
Well, first of all, again, just to be sure, we are moving away from merely subsidizing renewables to providing tax incentives for all zero-carbon electricity. I think that's a move in the right direction. Second, the cost of wind and solar has come down dramatically, I think, as someone observed earlier today, but we know we can't push to 100% renewable power, and this is something that is clear in all the credible studies. So we have a state like Iowa, like Mrs. Miller-Meeks described recently, where she's at 60% wind in her state. That's great, but it needs to be complemented also with clean, dispatchable sources. And many of you have noted the need for dispatchable. So the grids of the future will be a mixture of solar, wind, nuclear, and clean dispatchable sources, and will hopefully keep the costs reasonable, affordable, and provide all the electricity we need.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Crenshaw yields, and now Mr. Duncan from South.